Dear guests, welcome to our second part of the lecture day. This part will start with Lino Bianco, who had spent over 15 years of full-time study at university level. He is a graduate in philosophy and human studies, architecture and civil engineering, industrial geology, and architectural history from the University of Malta, University of Leicester, and the Bartlett Graduate School, University College London as well. He completed his doctoral degree in architecture and politics at the University of Architecture, Civil Engineering and Geodesy in Sofia. Bianco is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in London and the Geological Society in London as well, a warranted architect in native Malta and Bulgaria. Currently, he is full-time member of the academic staff at the Department of Architecture and Urban Design of the University of Malta. He had lectured at several institutes at tertiary, including La Sapienza University, Moscow Institute of Architecture, Georgian Technical University, and University of Architecture, Civil Engineering, and Geodesy in Sofia. Since 2014, he is the ambassador of the Republic of Malta to Bulgaria and Romania. Please welcome Lino Bianco.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will start my lecture, 30-minute lecture, by making reference to last lecture which I had here in the last triennale about 3 years ago. And basically, I will be making reference to a questionnaire which I had done at the time. But before moving to that, I want to focus and remind you of the theme of this triennale. Basically, it's about sustainable architecture for sustainable world, for our world. And I introduced the lecture precisely by this very interesting quote. Architecture isn't just about creating new buildings. Sometimes it's just about retuning what is already there. So, last year, the theme was values in architecture. It's a very interesting theme. And I had asked this question, and we had a questionnaire distributed. The results are available now in this publication. You can download it. And it's quite interesting, and I want to do a recap on this research. The difference between the way academics of architecture define architecture and the way students define architecture does vary. The preferred architect for academics and practitioners compared to those of students do vary as well. When it comes to defining architecture, literally, some people took a very non-pragmatic approach. But it's quite interesting that the youth, the young, the students, made reference to architecture in terms of sense experience. And it's something very interesting. And the little point about the findings was that architects, by the way, some of these star architects are really narcissists. One of them had answered about the best preferred architect to be himself. Imagine this guy, very humble guy. It was a guy, not a lady. But the students, they don't have any specific architect, but they want and prefer to be exposed to a number of architects so that they may be, they help them solve a particular theme, a particular issue. So that is about the findings. You can find it in this publication, which was issued about 2 weeks ago. So let's go to the theme of today's lecture about sustainable architecture. I'm going to try and make reference to sustainable design, sustainable architecture with respect to Central Mediterranean, and I will be using 2 case studies from Malta. Basically, I've changed the lecture overnight because the last 2 days I attended all the lectures, or most of them, and they were all about architects presenting their projects. In this particular case, I would like, in the next 15 minutes, to present an argument. And after my presentation, which I aim to finish within 20 minutes, 20, 25 minutes, I want 5 to 10 minutes Q&A. So if you have got any questions, queries, please bring them up. So, Malta is a very small island in the center of the Mediterranean. Basically, the two projects which I'm going to look at will focus on the notion of sustainability, not just in terms of environmental, eco-friendly design, but about, and it's something very important, the notion of well-being. And Christopher Day has published a book on this aspect of eco-design about 2 years ago, precisely addressing and emphasizing the notion of well-being. My presentation will explore sustainable architecture design with respect to 3 perspectives: environmental, technical, and financial. So these are the 3 aspects which I try and present in this particular short lecture. So, we're talking about buildings. A lot of people think about demolishing buildings, having new buildings. Why not thinking about modifying a building? This is about sustaining, this is about retuning, this is about adapting things. Okay? And this is precisely the theme which I wanted to look at. When it comes to Malta, it is wet, humid, and dry summers. Actually, it's very warm. We have got about 10 to 15 hours of daylight and 10 to 12 hours of sunshine in winter and summer, respectively. So I took 2 particular case studies. 2 houses which are built prior 1880, built towards the mid-19th century. Both of them are substandard. Really and truly, in both cases, the option was to demolish. But instead of demolishing, one tried to understand the spirit of place and develop it to make it fit for habitation. These 2 case studies are from Malta and Gozo. The Maltese Islands are a number of islands. There are 3 mainly habitable islands: Malta, which is about 400,000, Gozo, which is 30,000, and Comino, with 3 inhabitants. And basically, there is a case study from Malta, location of Zabbar, and from Gozo. These were the sites, original sites. This house, which is very small, and this site. On this particular site, according to planning regulations, you can only build 2 floors. The option is to demolish. Why? Because you can't convert it prima facie. Because in these particular houses, which looks big, 20–25% of the footprint is taken by walls. In this particular site in Gozo, the urban conservation area, buildings of heritage, stops with this line. By the way, these buildings were built in 1980, and they are awful. And this particular site, people could have developed 4 stories, could have put up 4 apartments. This is the end result. By putting an extension to this house, and instead of demolishing this place and having 4 apartments, you integrate this, expand it, extend it. There are 3 rooms. There are 2 other rooms behind this wall, and end up having this building. These are some interior views of the buildings. Okay, so as I told you, in the case of the Zabbar house, it was a substandard house, and it was converted, and the extensions were made use of traditional material. Traditional material, which is limestone, timber roofs, limestone roofing slabs as well. Studying the orientation, north-facing windows, you get daylight, but you don't get sunlight. In places like Malta, sunlight is a killer almost. You know, it becomes a greenhouse. For the south-facing walls, their windows were kept to a minimum. When it comes to the east and west, basically they are party walls. When it comes to the Gozo site, this is western facing, so windows were kept narrow because the sun on the western sun is low-lying, and even introduced a sundial here to make the building actually a landmark in the corner. I will not go through these slides. The material is actually in a publication which I made reference to, and you can easily go through it. Okay? Now, these are the plans of the house in Zabbar, and this is the plan of the house in Nadur, the layout. These are sections. That means, imagine you have got a piece of cheese, cutting it from the middle, and you see the way it functions. So let's go to the Zabbar house. The Zabbar house is deep. There were no windows at the back, and thus there were two aspects: to get natural light from these downwards and from windows here, and to get air circulation currents from northern lights. This house, actually both houses, don't make use of air conditioning. The walls are so thick, they are a thermal mass. In winter, they are warm and comfortable. In summer, they are cool. Actually, in August, you have to cover yourself. This is the Zabbar. This is the Nadur house. Okay? So, when it comes to a lot of elements, thinking about building form, the impact on the urban environment, we end up with two case studies which are quite in harmony with the existing environment. But there are other aspects which I wanted to address. When it comes to the north lights in washrooms, you get the daylight. We have got internal shafts which create a stuck effect. You have got living areas, ground floor level, bedrooms at the upper level. There is the private and the public spaces, you know. There's an element of cross ventilation which has been introduced. But this is precisely, don't look at the figures. I mean, don't try and study the figures, they are in the paper. I tried quantifying really what it costs you to demolish or extend and adapt a particular place. By the way, since this publication, which was published last December, the house in Nadur is being sold 300,000. But what does these figures state? And this is the argument. So, modifying heritage buildings, instead of demolishing them, there are three main aspects, three main advantages. And I proposed and put forward figures which are realistic. They are the market values now. So, if you aim and think of contemporary sustainable architecture design by not just modifying, but even using traditional material, even using construction techniques, you end up with an option which is viable on environmental aspects. Why? There are two reasons from the environmental aspect why it's valid. One, you have got integrating the bioclimatic and passive energy considerations in the end building, in the final building. And there is another aspect. You don't increase the number of residential units on a given site. So, if the house in Nadur, which was an extension to the lyric building, and you convert it into a semi-detached house, it's still one unit. If you have got 4 apartments, you have got 4 units. That means you're increasing the density there. It means you're increasing traffic. It means, as well, an increased cost. When it comes to the technical aspect, traditional materials are low maintenance. This is a fact. Not only that, they are durable. That's why they are still there. And again, we're talking about materials which are sturdy, which are strong. An added value from a technical aspect is the reduction of waste. When you demolish, the end result is waste. Then you have to quarry to get new building materials. This is part of the cost. We're talking about a sustainable word. Sustainable means sustainable in a holistic manner. Not just one aspect, but you have to read it in its complexity. And reduction of waste is important. In the Zabbar house, there was no waste. In the case of the Nadur house, even the excavation for the pool was actually used in a batching plant for aggregate production. And the final aspect, and this is an important aspect, because when you sell an argument to a client, to government, there is always the financial aspect. Unfortunately, we quantify everything in terms of money. But this is part of the reality. It's very difficult to convince a client to give up 4 apartments for one building, for one site, for one house. But it's not a matter of convincing, because the figures are worth it as well. Why I'm saying this? Because modifications and extensions to traditional residential units are a more secure real investment, rather than demolishing and building anew. This is very important and significant, and these are the figures on real market values. And you start realizing what is the market value of a property if you had to rebuild it or extending it. And this leads to the second point. Given that traditional building materials are durable and do weather well, and the construction is robust, the insurance premium are lower. When you think about houses, loans, etc., you think in terms of insurance. It's one thing you have got a place whereby time has proven and the materials used are very sustainable, low fire rating, very durable, etc., the insurance premium goes low. But keep in mind something, that the risk involved, you realize that in modifying, in extending a building, the risk is less financially. When you are developing a project, you have to have a tolerance, because there is a delay in getting a permit, there is a delay in selling an apartment. But these are very important aspects. When you go and borrow money, minimum, you'll get 10%, 8 to 10% interest. That is an expense. If it's not sold over 2 years, 3 years, that means effectively you could have lost and then ended up at a loss. And this is something which is very, very interesting. And it's worth noting that by modifying, instead of destroying a building to rebuild, it's more secure to actually improve on a given site. This is essentially my argument, that modifying, that means instead of just destroying, you just think of how can you rejuvenate, how can you retune a building for a new use. It's worth it, and there are 3 arguments for it. Environmental, by the way, buildings, traditional buildings do breed. Vernacular architecture, traditional architecture, architecture without architects, there are places which there is an element of a soul. And this is the truth. When it comes to the environmental aspect, it's there. These were people who, traditional, vernacular, old, these houses were built without architects. They were built by people who needed a specific reality. They were educated by the University of Life. They were not educated by tertiary. They didn't have any diplomas. They were educated by life. And this is extremely interesting and extremely important. Now, there is the technical aspect, because we're dealing with materials which are very, very, very sustainable and very good as materials. We're not talking about, if we think about concrete, in my country, we give a life expectancy for concrete for something like 30, 40 years, which is a lot. But if you think about our limestone buildings, some of them are hundreds of years old, a number of centuries old. And there is the other aspect, and this is, I think, one of the most convincing arguments, that financially it's worth it. It's a more secure investment. And secondly, one can argue that the premiums can be lower. By the way, masonry buildings, it's impossible almost to catch fire because the fire loading is zero. That is the truth. Final remark. Architecture design can transcend the mere compliance with local development planning policy. This is very, very important. It's one thing thinking about policy, having an additional floor or a less floor. By the way, in both houses, it was a huge planning process to convince the authorities that instead of thinking in terms of number, let's think in terms of people. Let's think in terms of keeping something, not just demolishing and increasing. As an architect, maybe even more worth it to put it down. Of course, you get more fees if you were to put it down and rebuild. Fair enough. But is it a matter of prostituting yourself to get money or being there to enhance the environment? And when it comes to architecture, architecture is not like any other art. A piece of sculpture, you may see it outside, you may go to a museum, or a piece of painting, you can go to a museum to see it or not. Architecture is there. Once it's built, once it's realized, it's forming society, it's forming people. And my second point, my final remark, is that a sustainable approach aimed at the well-being of the occupiers is secured through the use of traditional methods of construction, through traditional material and building physics. And finally, when you do a design which respects the existing residential properties, in itself, you're doing a socio-economic investment in a given locality. So, the theme, sustainable architecture for a sustainable world. That is a little quote. It's worth thinking of, because each one of us can make a difference. It's one thing you want to take the shortcut, but keep in mind that the shortcut is sometimes the longer way. Okay? So I'm going to stop here. I think I took about 21 minutes. Now we have got a few minutes for question and answer, and I look forward for you to come up with some comment, criticize, remarks, etc. Okay? Who's going to start? By the way, did you have ever had an experience of having a mosquito next to your bed? You want to sleep? Have you ever experienced that? Great. Great. And how can we make a difference? When we talk about sustainable architecture, we have to think not just in terms of material culture, we need to think in terms of well-being. Buildings can heal you, but they can make you sick. And this is another aspect of sustainability. If people feel uncomfortable in a given place, people take sick leave, people feel uncomfortable, people will not turn up for the job, people will not be so much productive in a given job. This is another element of sustainability. And sustainability, it's not a matter just something related to energy. I was in the Siemens building where this conference, the December conference, was on. It's a building which, it's all studied. The right temperature for the AC. Sorry, I felt uncomfortable. I was about to sleep. These are all environmental physics figures. We need a breeze in a building. It's not a matter of having something you're fossilized in. It's enough that we are living in a society, we're living in a world where we are forced not to be humans. Why I'm saying this? As architecture students, I'm sure, or as architects, I'm sure that spending nights working, it's the norm. You can't be a student architect or an architect not spending nights working. An all-nighter is a must in our profession, but we as humans, we are not nocturnal creatures. We are creatures which we can't see at night, we see during the day. So strictly speaking, at night, we should be asleep, not working or enjoying ourselves somewhere. Okay? So this is a little, my little point to make one think about the notion of sustainability. I have invited the class here whether they have got any comments. I want to refrain from asking a question myself, but if need be, I will ask. Yes, you. Any comment from your end? No? The lady? Yes.
Thank you. Well, I think it's very interesting, and I really appreciate all the ideas you have about building with natural materials, about building in a way reflecting the existing environment. And I don't know, I feel like this is like not the popular opinion with many architects that create an environment today. I don't know why this is so. Why do you think this is the way it is?
Okay, I will answer that. And the gentleman now has to come up with a question so that it will be a gender-balanced intervention from the audience. Yeah, I think architecture is about creation. And this is the beauty of building on creation rather than destroying. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't distinguish between development and speculation. And the distinction is very easy. It's between making love and rape. Sometimes people just rape. And you see some beautiful sites whereby, yes, I'm going to speak to sites in Malta, for example, Ramla Bay. Part of my work, my private consultancy work, we do some building work, but yes, it's challenging some development. Why not? Why should we develop an attitude in general of destruction? I am pro-development, but against speculation. I am pro-love, but against rape.
So I'm from the United States, Arizona, to be specific. One of the great architects in the United States is not an architect. He's an artist who practiced his art in Manhattan and could not stand the methods of distributing, exhibiting art, and so on and so forth. And he went to Marfa, Texas, which was a dusty ranching town that was falling apart. And people were exiting the town because there was no work. He went to Marfa, Texas, and he bought the army camp, which was abandoned, and made it into a compound of permanent exhibits of architectural and artwork. He also bought a compound and a number, 17 buildings in Marfa, Texas. And by doing that, he engaged the community that was dying to work, but there was no work in the town, and he rejuvenated the town. And the town today is an exuberant, active town where people visit to not only see the art, but the culture of the town. It's a prime example of what was presented today in my mind, where he took buildings that were falling apart and he rebuilt them and repurposed them and rejuvenated an entire town.
Yes, thank you.
Who was it?
Donald Judd.
Thank you. Architect Johnson is one of the leading contemporary American architects. He's an academician of the International Academy of Architecture. Thank you for your intervention. Thank you for the intervention of the lady. By the way, a gentleman. Oh, sorry. A young architecture student.
Yeah, I'm a student at this university. Well, we really appreciate this new aspect of sustainability that you showed us. But I have a technical question. If we have, for example, a building that is destroyed by the natural causes, I mean weather and being old and so on. How do you conserve such a building so that you can build more onto it? I mean, the construction methods that you use, probably by steel or by adding more concrete or something like that. Can you just explain to us what is the way that you consider taking?
It's an interesting question. Actually, it depends on a particular site. You talked about a building which can't, it's a building which is dying. Buildings have got a life when it comes to the use. Even the materials die, the material deteriorate. So it depends. There are certain cases where a building died or is dying and you can't intervene or just leave it there as part of the spirit of a place. But there may be a case, like this particular project in Gozo, whereby when I went to the site, you couldn't see this room. I realized that the only building which was of heritage value is outside UCA, and it's over a century old. If nothing, it's the only building which I can tie the locality with. And it's a building which you had to literally step into because the road around it went so high in a matter of 40 years that it's about a meter above the place. So it depends on each particular case. But we have to keep something in mind. First of all, places have got memory, have got a soul. And one has to relate to that. And you notice that in certain buildings, certain sites, are you Bulgarian? Yeah, okay. The Church of St. Sophia is, I think it's the 5th or 7th version of the same church on the same site. That is the sacredness of a given site. Outside the necropolis of the old Serdica. This is the spirit of place. Now, and it's important to relate to this because it's precisely which, of course, you have to respect, and as well, you have to respect the spirit of time. You can't just do something as if to look old. You have to respect the spirit of time. Definitely, what one should not do, in my humble opinion, is to take the advice of Phil Johnson and we decide to be prostitutes. By the way, a lot of architects are not only just prostitutes, they are cheap prostitutes. You know, so it depends which way. I think architecture is a beautiful vocation.
Yeah, I should explain the reason why I asked you this, because there is a problem in Bulgaria right now. Probably a lot of people here know about it. Well, in Plovdiv, there are a few warehouses, tobacco warehouses, which are really centuries old. And they have been the icon of the city. So probably a year or something ago, a lot of people, a lot of investors wanted to demolish these warehouses and they wanted to build new buildings there. Probably, I'm not sure if people were going to live in them or are going to work in them. I'm not really, I don't really know. Well, the problem is that they burned down the warehouses and only the facades left staying there. And they are really pretty much destroyed. And the people of the city really want to keep those warehouses the way that they look now and to probably restore them to their previous beauty and for them to become again the icon of the city. So what kind of advice would you give us? How should we approach this problem and how should we keep those warehouses the way they were?
Excellent. Actually, I've been to these warehouses 3 weeks ago. Okay? I think it is a crime literally against humanity, against the locality, because a building belongs to its owner in the sense that he or she would have bought it, but it belongs to society in general. How to protect it? It's interesting. In the last Triennale, I presented a case of Rem Koolhaas in Lebanon. Actually, I made reference to a project in the Ramla Bay. It was a big multi-million development, which we have put a case and stopped it. We were successful. And the project of Rem Koolhaas, some people spoke to me and we advised them, and actually was scrapped. How to ensure something like that? A lot of people, a lot of professionals, a lot of people out there are able, unfortunately, fortunately, to respect the environment and are sensitive more than the professionals. That's why I refer to professionals as being prostitutes. But it's quite interesting that the best way in this particular case to protect, in the case of Lebanon, was actually to schedule the land. And basically, I told you, I am pro-development. But pro-development does not mean destroying. And it's interesting, for example, there is a particular case of Leon Krier. They asked him to do this urban plan. And by the way, they went to him because he realized that they went to Norman Foster before. But Norman Foster was about 10 times more expensive. He was not aware, so they went to him. And they told him that they want to demolish a particular building. If you look up YouTube, you'll find this clip on YouTube. And he said, no way. Why should we demolish this building? And instead of taking the shortcut saying yes, he invested some energy. By the way, it's one of the most booming buildings in the locality there because it represents the spirit of place. Now, the buildings which you're making reference to, for example, there is a cluster of such beautiful buildings next to the bus station of Plovdiv. I'm telling you where. Isn't that? And by the way, it's obvious that this is arson. Arson means burning down buildings, okay? But yes, but this is a very short-sighted aspect because when it comes to these buildings, when you think, that's why it was part of the cost exercise. Do you know how expensive it is to build in traditional construction? Try and put that as part of the financial equation. By the way, they tried destroying these buildings. Do you know, they are destroying them mechanically because they can't be burned down. That is the truth. They don't have, the fire loading is next to none. And they are trying to destroy them as much as possible. But, you know, that is where, yes, as a community, we'll say no to them. And there is another aspect, because when you present the other case, that's why the last argument, which us in architecture and people out there don't think about, the notion of insurances. Insurances are very expensive, not so expensive in Bulgaria, but they will become expensive much more in the future. But when you think the notion of insurance, you realize that it's worth to protect. When you think about new buildings, where on planning policy, they ask you for parking spaces. Imagine this theater, okay? You want to demolish to build something else. At the time when this theater was built, the notion of having in planning policy that every 10 people you have to have a parking space. That means over here, if there are something like 500 seats, it means you have got 50 cars. But every car, if you don't have it, you have to pay 2,000 leva for the community. Things will change. Because 2,000 leva times 50, it's a figure which is intrinsically already invested in this property by not destroying it. And you start thinking and work out a very viable solution and come up with the options. So it is quite short-sighted to destroy, you know? So this is, in my opinion, you know, deciding to be a whore instead of taking a leap beyond. I think I took more than 30 minutes because the Q&A was about 10 minutes. I'm here, you know, I can stay much longer, but I'm aware that there are 4 more lectures, and the poor guy who will be presenting this afternoon, I mean, I don't want to have a class which are asleep and will be tedious for them. So thank you all. Hope we meet. Good luck. This is our word. We have to contribute to it. Whatever it is, we are part of this humanity, which we are given. We are part of this word, which we are given to take care of for our sons and grandsons. Thank you.